History of Modern India 610 Chapter 31 Peasant Movements 1857–1947 Peasantry. Under colonialism, the impoverishment of the Indian peasantry was a direct result of the transformation of the agrarian structure due to Black Circle colonial economic policies, Black Circle ruin of the handicrafts leading to overcrowding offland, Black Circle the new land revenue system, and Black Circle colonial administrative and judicial system. The peasants suffered from high rents, illegal levies, arbitrary evictions, and unpaid labor in zamindari areas. In riot-weary areas, the government itself levied heavy land revenue. The overburdened farmer, fearing loss of his only source of livelihood, often approached the local moneylender, who made full use of the former's difficulties by extracting high rates of interests on the money lent. Often, the farmer had to mortgage his land and cattle. Sometimes, the moneylender seized the mortgaged belongings. Gradually, over large areas, the actual cultivators were reduced to the status of tenants at will, sharecroppers, and landless laborers. The peasants often resisted the exploitation, and soon they realized that their real enemy was the colonial state. Sometimes, the desperate peasants took to crime to come out of intolerable conditions. These crimes included robbery, dacoity, and what has been called social banditry. Peasant Movements 1857–1947–611, A Survey of Early Peasant Movements. Indigo Revolt 1859–60. In Bengal, the indigo planters, nearly all Europeans, exploited local peasants by forcing them to grow indigo on their lands instead of the more paying crops like rice. The planters forced the peasants to take advance sums and enter into fraudulent contracts, which were then used against the peasants. The planters intimidated the peasants through kidnappings, illegal confinements, flogging, attacks on women and children, seizure of cattle, burning and demolition of houses, and destruction of crops. The anger of the peasants exploded in 1859 when, led by Digambar Biswas and Bishnu Biswas of Nadia district, they decided not to grow indigo under duress and resisted the physical pressure of the planters and their lathials, retainers, backed by police and the courts. They also organized a counter force against the planters' attacks. The planters also tried methods like evictions and enhanced rents. The riots replied by going on a rent strike, by refusing to pay the enhanced rents, and by physically resisting the attempts to evict them. Gradually, they learned to use the legal machinery and initiated legal action supported by fund collection. The Bengali intelligentsia played a significant role by supporting the peasants' cause through newspaper campaigns, organization of mass meetings, preparing memoranda on peasants' grievances, and supporting them in legal battles. The government appointed an indigo commission to inquire into the problem of indigo cultivation. Based on its recommendations, the government issued a notification in November 1860 that the riots could not be compelled to grow indigo, and that it would ensure that all disputes were settled by legal means. But the planters were already closing down factories, and indigo cultivation was virtually wiped out from Bengal by the end of 1860. Pabna Agrarian leagues during the 1870s and 1880s, large parts of eastern Bengal witnessed agrarian unrest, caused by oppressive practices of 612. A brief history of modern Indiath zamindars. The zamindars resorted to enhanced rents beyond legal limits and prevented the tenants from acquiring occupancy rights under Act X of 1859. To achieve their ends, the zamindars resorted to forcible evictions, seizure of cattle and crops, and prolonged, costly litigation in courts where the poor peasant found himself at a disadvantage. Having had enough of the oppressive regime, the peasants of Yusuf Shahi Pargana in Pabna district formed an agrarian league or combination to resist the demands of the zamindars. The league organized a rent strike. The riots refused to pay the enhanced rents, challenging the zamindars in the courts. Funds were raised by riots to fight the court cases. The struggles spread throughout Pabna and to other districts of East Bengal. The main form of struggle was that of legal resistance. There was very little violence. Though the peasant discontent continued to linger until 1885, most of the cases had been solved, partially through official persuasion, and partially because of zamindars' fears. Many peasants were able to acquire occupancy rights and resist enhanced rents. The government also promised to undertake legislation to protect the tenants from the worst aspects of zamindari oppression. In 1885, the Bengal Tenancy Act was passed. Again, a number of young Indian intellectuals supported the peasants' cause. These included Bankim Chandra Chatterjee, R.C. Dutt, and the Indian Association under Surendranath Banerjee. Deccan riots. The riots of Deccan region of western India suffered heavy taxation under the riot-weary system. Here again, the peasants found themselves trapped in a vicious network with the moneylender as the exploiter and the main beneficiary. The semi-moneylenders were mostly outsiders, Marwaris or Gujaratis. The conditions had worsened due to a crash in cotton prices after the end of the American Civil War in 1864, the government's decision to raise the land revenue by 50% in 1867, and a succession of bad harvests. In 1874, the growing tension between the moneylenders and the peasants resulted in a social boycott movement organized by the riots against the outsider moneylenders. Peasant movements 1857, 1947, 613. The riots refused to buy from their shops. No peasant would cultivate their fields. The barbers, washermen, shoemakers would not serve them. This social boycott spread rapidly to the villages of Pune, Ahmednagar, Sholapur, and Satara. Soon, the social boycott was transformed into agrarian riots with systematic attacks on the moneylenders, houses, and shops. The debt bonds and deeds were seized and publicly burnt. The government succeeded in repressing the movement. As a conciliatory measure, the Deccan Agriculturists' Relief Act was passed in 1879. This time also, the modern nationalist intelligentsia of Maharashtra supported the peasants' cause. Changed nature of peasant movements. After 1857, black circle peasants emerged as the main force in agrarian movements, fighting directly for their own demands. The demands were centered almost wholly on economic issues. The movements were directed against the immediate enemies of the peasant, foreign planters and indigenous zamindars and moneylenders. The struggles were directed towards specific and limited objectives and redressal of particular grievances. Colonialism was not the target of these movements. It was not the objective of these movements to end the system of subordination or exploitation of the peasants. Territorial reach was limited. There was no continuity of struggle or long-term organization. The peasants developed a strong awareness of their legal rights and asserted them in and outside the courts. Weaknesses, black circle, there was a lack of an adequate understanding of colonialism. The 19th century peasants did not possess a new ideology and a new social, economic, and political program. These struggles, however militant, occurred within the 614. A brief history of modern India framework of the old societal order, lacking a positive conception of an alternative society. Later movements, the peasant movements of the 20th century, were deeply influenced by and had a marked impact on the national freedom struggle. Refer to the chapters on freedom movement for Champaran and Kheda Satyagraha. The Kisan Sabha movement. After the 1857 revolt, the Awadh talukdars had got back their lands. This strengthened the hold of the talukdars or big landlords over the agrarian society of the province. The majority of the cultivators were subjected to high rents, summary evictions, bidakali, illegal levies, renewal fees or nazrana. The First World War had hiked the prices of food and other necessities. This worsened the conditions of peasants. Mainly due to the efforts of the Home Rule activists, Kisan Sabhas were organized in UP. The United Provinces Kisan Sabha was set up in February 1918 by Gauri Shankar Misra and Indra Narayan Dwivedi. Madan Mohan Malaviya supported their efforts. By June 1919, the UP Kisan Sabha had 450 branches. Other prominent leaders included Jingiri Singh, Durgapal Singh, and Baba Ramchandra. In June 1920, Baba Ramchandra urged Nehru to visit these villages. During these visits, Nehru developed close contacts with the villagers. In October 1920, the Awadh Kisan Sabha came into existence because of differences in nationalist ranks. The Awadh Kisan Sabha asked the Kisans to refuse to till Bidakali land, not to offer Hari and Bigar, forms of unpaid labor, to boycott those who did not accept these conditions, and to solve their disputes through panchayats, from the earlier forms of mass meetings and mobilization. The patterns of activity changed rapidly in January 1921 to the looting of bazaars, houses, granaries, and clashes with the police. The centers of activity were primarily districts of Rai Bareilly, Faizabad, and Sultanpur. The movement declined soon, partly due to government repression and partly because of the passing of the Awadh Rent Amendment Act. Peasant movements 1857, 1947, 615 Eka movement. Towards the end of 1921, peasant discontent resurfaced in some northern districts of the United Provinces, Hardai, Barach, Sitapur. The issues involved were high rents, 50% higher than the recorded rates, Roman II, oppression of thickedars in charge of revenue collection, and Roman III, practice of share rents. The meetings of the Eka, or the Unity, movement involved a symbolic religious ritual in which the assembled peasants vowed that they would Black Circle pay only the recorded rent, but would pay it on time. Black Circle not leave when evicted. Black Circle refuse to do forced labor. Black Circle give no help to criminals. And Black Circle abide by panchayat decisions. The grassroots leadership of the Eka movement came from Madhuri Pasi and other low-caste leaders, and Manasmal zamindars. By March 1922, severe repression by authorities brought the movement to an end. Mapilla revolt. The Mapillas were the Muslim tenants inhabiting the Malabar region, where most of the landlords were Hindus. The Mapillas had expressed their resentment against the oppression of the landlords during the 19th century also. Their grievances centered around lack of security of tenure, high rents, renewal fees, and other oppressive exactions. The Mapilla tenants were particularly encouraged by the demand of the local Congress body for a governmental legislation regulating tenant-landlord relations. Soon, the Mapilla movement merged with the ongoing Khilafat agitation. The leaders of the Khilafat non-cooperation movement like Gandhi, Shaukat Ali, and Maulana Azad addressed Mapilla meetings. After the arrest of national leaders, the leadership passed into the hands of local Mapilla leaders. things took a turn for the worse in August 1921 when the arrest of a respected priest leader, Ali Musalier, sparked off large-scale riots. Initially, the symbols of British. 616. A brief history of modern India authority, courts, police stations, treasuries and offices, and unpopular landlords, Genmis who were mostly Hindus, were the targets. But once the British declared martial law and repression began in earnest, the character of the rebellion underwent a definite change. Many Hindus were seen by the Mapillas to be helping the authorities. What began as an anti-government and anti-landlord affair acquired communal overtones. The communalization of the rebellion completed the isolation of the Mapillas from the Khilafat non-cooperation movement. By December 1921, all resistance had come to a stop. Bardoli Satyagraha, the Bardoli Taluka in Surat district, had witnessed intense politicization after the coming of Gandhi on the national political scene. The movement sparked off in January 1926 when the authorities decided to increase the land revenue by 30%. The Congress leaders were quick to protest and a Bardoli inquiry committee was set up to go into the issue. The committee found the revenue hike to be unjustified. In February 1926, Vallabhbhai Patel was called to lead the movement. The women of Bardoli gave him the title of Sardar. Under Patel, the Bardoli peasants resolved to refuse the payments of the revised assessment until the government appointed an independent tribunal or accepted the current amount as full payment. To organize the movement, Patel set up 13 Chhavanis or workers' camps in the Taluka. Bardoli Satyagraha Patrika was brought out to mobilize public opinion. An intelligence wing was set up to make sure all tenants followed the movement's resolutions. Those whoopos the movement faced a social boycott. Special emphasis was placed on the mobilization of women. K.M. Munshi and Lalji Naranji resigned from the Bombay Legislative Council in support of the movement. By August 1928, massive tension had built up in Thiria. There were prospects of a railway strike in Bombay. Gandhi reached Bardoli to stand by in case of any emergency. The government was looking for a graceful withdrawal now. It set the condition that first the enhanced rent be paid by all the occupants, not actually done. Then, a committee went into the whole affair and found the revenue hike to be unjustified and recommended a rise of 6.03% only. Peasant movements 1857, 1947, 617. During the 1930s, the peasant awakening was influenced by the Great Depression in the industrialized countries and the civil disobedience movement, which took the form of no rent, no revenue movement in many areas. Also, after the decline of the active phase movement, 1932, many new entrants to active politics started looking for suitable outlets for release of their energies and took to organization of peasants. The All India Kisan Congress / Sabha. This Sabha was founded in Lucknow in April 1936 with Swami Sahajanand Saraswati as the president and N.G. Ranga as the general secretary. A Kisan manifesto was issued and a periodical under Indulal Yagnik started. The AIKS and the Congress held their sessions in Faizpur in 1936. The Congress manifesto, especially the agrarian policy, for the 1937 provincial elections was strongly influenced by the AIKS agenda. Under Congress ministries, the period 1937-39 was the high watermark of the peasant movements and activity under the Congress provincial rule. The chief form of mobilization was through holding kissing conferences and meetings where demands were aired and resolutions were passed. Mobilization campaigns were carried out in the villages. Peasant activity in provinces Kerala and the Malabar region. The peasants were mobilized mainly by the Congress Socialist Party activists. Many Karshak Sangams, peasants' organizations, came into existence. The most popular method was the marching of jaths or peasants' groups to the landlords to get their demands accepted. One significant campaign by the peasants was in 1938 for the amendment of the Malabar Tenancy Act, 1929. Andhra, this region had already witnessed a decline in the prestige of zamindars after their defeat by congressmen in elections. Anti-zamindar movements were going on in some places. 618. A brief history of modern India. Many provincial riot associations were active. N.G. Ranga had set up, in 1933, the India Peasants' Institute. After 1936, the Congress Socialists started organizing the peasants. At many places, the summer schools of economics and politics were held and addressed by leaders like P.C. Joshi, Ajay Ghosh, and R.D. Bardwaj. Bihar here, Sajanand Saraswati was joined by Karyanand Sharma, Yajanandan Sharma, Rahul Sankrityayan, Panchanan Sharma, Jaman Karjidi, etc. In 1935, the Provincial Kisan Conference adopted the anti-zamindari slogan. The Provincial Kisan Sabha developed a rift with the Congress over the Bakasht land issue because of an unfavorable government resolution which was not acceptable to the Sabha. The movement died out by August 1939. Punjab. The earlier peasant mobilization here had been organized by the Punjab Naujawan Bharat Sabha, the Kiari Kisan Party, the Congress, and the Akalis. A new direction to the movement was given by the Punjab Kisan Committee in 1937. The main targets of the movement were the landlords of Western Punjab who dominated the Unionist ministry. The immediate issues taken up were resettlement of land revenue in Amritsar and Lahore and increase in water rates in canal colonies of Multan and Montgomery, where feudal levies were being demanded by the private contractors. Here, the peasants went in a strike and were finally able to win concessions. The peasant activity in Punjab was mainly concentrated in Jalandhar, Amritsar, Hoshiarpur, Lyalpur, and Shekhupura. The Muslim tenants at will of West Punjab and the Hindu peasants of southeastern Punjab, today's Haryana, remained largely unaffected. Peasant activity was also organized in Bengal, Burdwanan 24 Parganas, Assam, Surma Valley, Orissa, Central Provinces, and NWFP. During the war, because of a pro-war line adopted by the communists, the AIKS was split on communist and non-communist lines, and many veteran leaders like Sajanand, Indulal Yagnik, and N.G. Peasant movements 1857, 1947, 619, Ranga left the Sabah. But the Kisan Sabah continued to work among the people. It did notable work during the famine of 1943. Post-war phase Tebhaga movement in September 1946, the Bengal Provincial Kisan Sabah gave a call to implement, through mass struggle, the Flood Commission recommendations of Tebhaga, 2/3 is hair, to the Bargardars, the sharecroppers also known as Bigchasi or Adhyar, instead of the 1/2 share. The Bargardars worked on lands rented from the Jotdars. The communist cadres, including many urban student militias, went to the countryside to organize the Bargardars. The central slogan was Nij Kamer Dihan Tolo, i.e., sharecroppers taking the paddy to their own thrashing floor and not to the Jotdar's house, as before, so as to enforce it Ibhaga. The storm center of the movement was North Bengal, principally among Rajbanshis, a low caste of tribal origin. Muslims also participated in large numbers. The movement dissipated soon, because of the League Ministry's SOP of the Bargardari Bill, and intensified repression. The popularization of the Hindu Mahasabha's agitation for a separate Bengal and renewed riots in Calcutta, which ended the prospects of sympathetic support from the urban sections. Telangana movement. This was the biggest peasant guerrilla war of modern Indian history, affecting 3,000 villages and 3 million population. The princely state of Hyderabad under Asajahi Nizams was marked by a combination of religious linguistic domination, by a Mal Urdu-speaking Muslim elite ruling over predominantly Hindu Telugu, Marathi, Kannada-speaking groups, total lack of political and civil liberties, grossest forms of forced exploitation by desmuks, jagirdars, doras, landlords, in forms of forced labor, vethai, and illegal exactions. During the war, the communist-led guerrillas had built a strong base in Telangana villages, through Andhra Mahasabha, had been leading local struggles on issues such as 620, a brief history of modern India wartime exactions, abuse of rationing, excessive rent, and vethi. The uprising began in July 1946 when a Desmuk thug murdered a village militant in Jangyan Taluk of Nalgonda. Soon, the uprising spread to Warangal and Khammam. The peasants organized themselves into village sanghams and attacked using lathis, stone slings, and chili powder. They had to face brutal repression. The movement was at its greatest intensity between August 1947 and September 1948. The peasants brought about a rout of the Razakars, the Nizam's stormtroopers. Once the Indian security forces took over Hyderabad, the movement fizzled out. The Telangana movement had many positive achievements to its credit. In the villages controlled by guerrillas, vethai and forced labor disappeared. Agricultural wages were raised. Illegally seized lands were restored. Steps were taken to fix ceilings and redistribute lands. Measures were taken to improve irrigation and fight cholera. An improvement in the condition of women was witnessed. The autocratic feudal regime of India's biggest princely state was shaken up, clearing the way for the formation of Andhra Pradesh on linguistic lines and realizing another aim of the national movement in this region. Balance sheet of peasant movements. These movements created an atmosphere for post-independence agrarian reforms. For instance, abolition of zamindari. They eroded the power of the landed class, thus adding to the transformation of the agrarian structure. These movements were based on the ideology of nationalism. The nature of these movements was similar in diverse areas. Peasant movements 1857, 1947, 621, summary Black Circle peasantry under colonialism, Black Circle early peasant movements, Indigo Revolt, Pabna Agrarian Leagues, Deccan Riots, Black Circle change in nature of movements after 1857, Black Circle weaknesses, Black Circle latter movements, Kisan Sabha, Eka, Mapilla Revolt, Bardali Satyagraha. All India Kisan Congress, under Congress ministries, Black Circle peasant activity in the past, during the war, post-war period, Black Circle balance sheet. 622, a brief history of modern India, 622, chapter 32, the movement of the working class, the beginning of the second half of the 19th century, heralded the entry of modern industry into India. The thousands of hands employed in construction of railways were harbingers of the modern Indian working class. Further industrialization came with the development of ancillary industries, along with railways. The coal industry developed fast and employed a large working force. Then came the cotton and the jute industries. The Indian working class suffered from the same kind of exploitation witnessed during the industrialization of Europe and the rest of the West, such as low wages, long working hours, unhygienic and hazardous working conditions, employment of child labor, and the absence of basic amenities. The presence of colonialism in India gave a distinctive touch to the Indian working class movement. The Indian working class had to face two basic antagonistic forces: an imperialist political rule and economic exploitation at the hands of both foreign and native capitalist classes. Under the circumstances, inevitably, the Indian working class movement became intertwined with the political struggle for national emancipation. Early efforts: the early nationalists, especially the moderates, Black Circle, were indifferent to the labor's cause. Black Circle differentiated between the labor in the movement of the working class, 623 owned factories, and those in the British-owned factories. Black Circle believed that labor legislations would affect the competitive edge enjoyed by the Indian-owned industries. Black Circle did not want a division in the movement on the basis of classes, and Black Circle did not support the Factory Acts of 1881 and 1891 for these reasons. Thus, earlier attempts to improve the economic conditions of the workers were in the nature of the philanthropic efforts, which were isolated, sporadic, and aimed at specific local grievances. 1870 Sasapada Banerjee started a working men's Clubend newspaper Burat Shramjeevi. 1878 Sorabji Shaparji Bengali tried to get a bill providing better working conditions to labor. Passed in the Bombay Legislative Council, 1880 Narayan Meghaji Lakund started the newspaper Deen Bandhu and set up the Bombay Mill and Mill Hands Association. 1899 The first strike by the Great Indian Peninsular Railways took place, and it got widespread support. Tilak's Kesari and Maharatha had been campaigning for the strike for months. There were many prominent nationalist leaders like Bipin Chandra Pal and G. Subramania Ayar who demanded better conditions for workers and other pro-labor reforms. During Swadeshi upsurge, workers participated in wider political issues. Strikes were organized by Ashwini Kumar Banerjee, Prabhat Kumar Roy Shohuri, Pramtosh Bose, and Apurba Kumar Ghosh. The CES strikes were organized in government press, railways, and the jute industry. There were attempts to form trade unions, but the were not very successful. Subramania Siva and Chidambaram Pillai led strikes in Tuticorin and Tirunelveli and were arrested. The biggest strike of the period was organized after Tilak's arrest and trial. 624. A brief history of modern India during the First World War and after the war and its aftermath brought a rise in exports, soaring prices, massive profiteering opportunities for the industrialists but very low wages for the workers. This led to discontent among workers. The emergence of Gandhi led to a broad-based national movement, and the emphasis was placed on the mobilization of the workers and peasants for the national cause. A need was felt for the organization of the workers in trade unions. International events like the establishment of a socialist republic in the Soviet Union, formation of the Comintern, and setting up of International Labour Organization, ILO, lent a new dimension to the movement of the working class in India. The ADOC, the All India Trade Union Congress, was founded on October 31, 1920. The Indian National Congress president for Thayer, Lala Lajpat Rai, was elected as the first president of AITUC and Dewan Chaman Lal as the first general secretary. Lajpat Rai was the first to link capitalism with imperialism. Imperialism and militarism are the twin children of capitalism. The prominent Congress and Swarajist leader C.R. Das presided over the third and the fourth sessions of the AITUC. The Gaya session of the Congress, 1922, welcomed the formation of the AITUC, and a committee was formed to assist it. C.R. Das advocated that the Congress should take up the workers' and peasants' cause and incorporate them in struggle for Swaraj, or else they would get isolated from the movement. Other leaders who kept close contacts with AITUC included Nehru, Subhas Bose, C.F. Andrews, J.M. Sengupta, Satyamurthy, V.V. Giri, and Sarojini Naidu. In the beginning, the AITUC was influenced by social democratist ideas of the British Labour Party. The Gandhian philosophy of nonviolence, trusteeship, and class collaboration had great influence on the movement. Gandhi helped organize the Ahmedabad Textile Labour Association, 1918, and through a protest secured a 27.5% wage hike. Later, the Arbitrators' Award ensured a 35% raise. The movement of the working class, 625 the Trade Union Act, 1926 the Trade Union Act, 1926. Black Circle recognized trade unions as legal associations. Black Circle laid down conditions for registration and regulation of trade union activities. And Black Circle secured immunity, both civil and criminal, for trade unions from prosecution for legitimate activities, but put some restrictions on their political activities. Late 1920, S.A. strong communist influence on the movement lent militant and revolutionary content to it. In 1928, there was a 6-month-long strike in Bombay textile mills led by the Guinea Kamgar Union. The whole of 1928 witnessed unprecedented industrial unrest. This period also saw the crystallization of various communist groups, with leaders like S.A. Dange, Muzaffar Ahmed, P.C. Joshi, Sohan Singh Joshi, etc. Alarmed at the increasing strength of the trade union movement under extremist influence, the government resorted to legislative restrictions. It passed the Public Safety Ordinance, 1929, and the Trade Disputes Act, TDA, 1929. The TDA, 1929, Black Circle made compulsory the appointment of courts of inquiry and consultation boards for settling industrial disputes. Black Circle made illegal the strikes in public utility services like posts, railways, water, and electricity. Unless each individual worker planning to go on strike gave an advance notice of 1 month to the administration. And Black Circle forbade trade union activity of coercive or purely political nature, and even sympathetic strikes. Meerut Conspiracy Case, 1929. In March 1929, the government arrested 31 labor leaders, and the 3.5-year trial resulted in the conviction of Muzaffar Ahmed, S.A. Dange, Jagalkar, Philip Spratt, Ben Bradley, Shaukat Usmani, and others. The trial got worldwide publicity but weakened the working class movement. The workers participated during 1930 in the civil disobedience movement, but after 1931, there was a dip in. 626. A brief history of modern Indiath working class movement because of a split in 1931, in which the corporatist trend led by N.M. Joshi broke away from the AITUC to set up the All India Trade Union Federation. In 1935, the communists rejoined the AITUC now. The left front consisted of the communists, Congress Socialists, and the leftist nationalists like Nehru and Subhas. Under Congress ministries during the 1937 elections, the AITUC had supported the Congress candidates. The Congress governments in provinces gave a fillip to the trade union activity. The Congress ministries were generally sympathetic to the workers' demands. Many legislations favorable to the workers were passed. During and after the Second World War initially, the workers opposed the war. But after 1941, when Russia joined the war on behalf of the Allies, the communists described the war as a people's war and supported it. The communists dissociated themselves from the Quit India movement. A policy of industrial peace was advocated by the communists. In the period 1945 to 1947, workers participated actively in the post-war national upsurges. In 1945, the dockworkers of Bombay and Calcutta refused to load ships tacking supplies to the warring troops in Indonesia. During 1946, the workers went on a strike in support of the naval ratings. During the last year of foreign rule, there were strikes by workers of posts, railways, and many other establishments. After independence, the working class movement came to be associated with the various political ideologies. Summary: Black Circle, early efforts. Black Circle during Swadeshi movement, Black Circle First World War, and after Black Circle during and after the Second World War. Challenges before the newborn nation, 627,627, Chapter 33. Challenges before the newborn nation. First day of independent India, August 15, 1947, started an epoch that ended India's colonial subjugation and looked forward to a new India as an independent country. The Constituent Assembly of India met at 11 p.m. on August 14, 1947. Rajendra Prasad presided over the session. In a ceremony held in the Constituent Assembly, in Parliament House, at midnight of August 15, 1947, Jawaharlal Nehru, speaking as the first Prime Minister of independent India, gave his historic speech. Nehru said, Long Unit 10 Independence after chapters 33 to 39. 628. A brief history of modern India. Years ago we made a tryst with destiny, and now the time comes when we shall redeem our pledge, not wholly or in full measure, but very substantially. At the stroke of midnight, when the world sleeps, India will wake to life and freedom. August 15, 1947, Jawaharlal Nehru, as Prime Minister of India, hoisted the Indian national flag above the Lahori Gate of Red Fort in Delhi. First government after independence, the Governor-General and the ministers were sworn in. Jawaharlal Nehru took charge as the first Prime Minister of India on August 15, 1947, and was assisted by 15 other members. Sardar Patel served as the Deputy Prime Minister till his death in December 1950. Lord Mountbatten, and later C. Rajagopalachari, served as Governor-General till January 261,950, when India became a republic and elected Rajendra Prasad as its first president. The first Council of Ministers of Independent India was as follows. 1. Jawaharlal Nehru, Prime Minister, Minister of External Affairs and Commonwealth Relations, Minister of Scientific Research. 2. Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of Home Affairs and States, Minister of Information and Broadcasting. 3. Maulana Abul Kalam Azad, Minister of Education. 4. John Matai, Minister of Railways and Transport. 5. Sardar Baldev Singh, Minister of Defence. 6. Jairamdas Daulatram, Minister of Food and Agriculture. 7. Jagjivan Ram, Minister of Labour. 8. C.H. Babha, Minister of Commerce. 9. Amrit Kaur, Minister of Health. 10. Rafi Ahmed Kidwai, Minister of Communications. 11. Narhar Vishnu Gajal, Minister of Works, Mines and Power. 12. R.K. Shanmugam Chetty, Minister of Finance 13. K.C. Neogi, Minister of Relief and Rehabilitation 14. B.R. Ambedkar, Minister of Law belonged to the Challenges before the newborn nation, 629 Scheduled Castes Federation, resigned in 1951-15. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee, Minister of Industries and Supplies Hindu Mahasabha, first to resign from the cabinet in April 1950-16. Narasimha Gopalaswamy Iyengar, Minister without portfolio, assigned the task to act as a link between the Union government and the cabinet of East Punjab government 17. Mohanlal Saxena, Minister without portfolio challenges independent India, however, had to face several challenges. Immediate challenges: territorial and administrative integration of princely states, communal riots, rehabilitation of nearly 60 lakh refugees migrated from Pakistan, protection of Muslims living in India, as well as those going to Pakistan from communal gangs, need to avoid war with Pakistan, communist insurgency, etc. Medium-term challenges: framing of the Constitution for India, building of a representative, democratic, and civil libertarian political order, elections, and abolition of feudal setup in agriculture, etc. Long-term challenges: national integration, economic development, poverty alleviation, etc. India, as well as Pakistan, faced the consequences of partition. The Independence Act had laid the procedure for the resolution of three major problems. I. The settlement of boundaries between the two nations. Roman II. The division of apparatus and personnel of Indian civil services and some other services. And Roman III. Division of military assets and formations. Radcliffe's boundary award and the communal riots in accordance with the partition plan. The respective legislative assemblies of Punjab and Bengal met in two sections, owner representing the Muslim majority districts and other of the rest of the province, and decided by simple majority in favor of the partition of the two provinces. West Punjab, which went 630. A brief history of modern India-Pakistan received 62,000 square miles of territory and 15.7 million people. Census 1941, of whom 11.85 million were Muslims. East Punjab, India's share, received 37,000 square miles of land area, with a population of 12.6 million, of whom 4.37 million were Muslims. Likewise, West Bengal became part of India with a territory of 28,000 square miles, and a population of 21.2 million, of whom 5.3 million were Muslims. East Bengal, which constituted East Pakistan, got 49,400 square miles of territory and 39.1 million people, 27.7 million Muslims and the rest non-Muslims. Thus, on both sides of the Radcliffe line, sizable sections of populations became minority, religion-wise. 20 million in Muslims in Pakistan, and 42 million later, reduced to 35 million Muslims in India. Challenges before the Boundary Commission. In absurd hurry, the British government appointed the Boundary Commission under the chairmanship of Sir Cyril Radcliffe. The Boundary Commission consisted of 2 Muslims and 2 non-Muslim judges in each case, and worked under serious constraints. Radcliffe, with very limited knowledge of India, and with the use of out-of-date maps and census materials, was required to draw the boundaries and decide disputed points within a period of 6 weeks. Although the religious demography was the deciding factor, other factors such as rivers as natural boundaries, administrative units, economic viability, railway and roadway connectivity, and other infrastructural facilities such as the canal system were also to be taken into consideration. The Sikhs, as a third party, Hindus and Muslims being 2 parties, were demographically scattered throughout Punjab. Their demand that all Sikh holy shrines be included in East Punjab, part of India, further complicated the situation. In face of such legal intricacies, a rational approach gave way to political considerations. The census of 1941, the basis of decisions, was also faulty. So, the resultant boundary lines were bound to create several problems and leave many people unhappy. The report of the Boundary Commission was ready by August 12, but Lord Mountbatten intentionally made it. Challenges before the newborn nation, 631 public after August 15, so that the responsibility of the consequences, communal riots and its repercussions, would not fall on the British. The way in which the British government decided to demarcate the boundary and leave the country amidst unrest was a most callous way to behave. Regions most affected by riots. The communal riots had started in August 1946 itself, but with the announcement of partition and independence, the situation became more inflamed. The regions through which the Radcliffe line was drawn became most violent, and maximum number of murders, rapes, and abduction of women and children took place. Armed bands of Sikhs and Hindus and Muslims roamed the cities and countryside of Punjab, committing unbelievable crimes. A war of extermination was launched on both sides of the border, when refugee trains are reported to have arrived, sometimes carrying only dead bodies. According to an estimate, around 180,000 were killed, 60,000 from the west and 120,000 from the east. The regions of Bengal, due to the presence of Gandhi and his efforts through fasts, experienced less violence in comparison to Punjab. Riots began in Delhi, with a massacre of Muslims in revenge for Punjab. Gandhian fasts had a temporary impact. In Bihar, prior to partition, in October 1946, Hindu peasants, allegedly instigated by Hindu landlords to divert attention from agrarian problems, killed Muslims. This was followed by violence in Gar-Mukteswar in the United Province where Hindu pilgrims killed 1,000 Muslims. But after partition, due to Gandhi's initiatives, no massacres took place in these regions. Why so many casualties? The Governor-General anticipated the danger of riots and assembled a Bandara force of 50,000 men. But Nehru's decision to not allow British troops into the matter proved devastating. The Bandara force themselves got divided along communal affiliations. Further, the European officers were busy preparing to leave India. According to Lockhart, the commander-in-chief of the 632, A Brief History of Modern Indian Army, August 15, December 31, 1947. The widespread disorder would have been under control if all the personnel from civil and armed services had been placed in their respective new countries. Challenges associated with division of resources. The partition of India was accompanied by division of resources of the civil government, as well as division of the military forces and equipment. Views the systematic failure of British governments to contemplate or prepare for any planned transfer of power to India is epitomized by the fact that a man of Radcliffe's background and lack of experience, he had never been east of Gibraltar before he came to India, should have been asked to embark on such a fundamental task so very late in the day. Walter Reed, keeping the jewel in the crown with limitations of time, knowledge, and understanding. Was virtually impossible to deal adequately with the often vital accessories of a boundary line, such as the location of the canal headwaters in relation to the canals themselves, communications by road and rail, the fate of mixed or isolated populations, and such invisible problems as the location of pasture lands in relation to villagers, flocks, and herds. Percival Spearhey, Radcliffe, tried to take account of irrigation canals and water supplies so that there was enough water in the central Punjab. But on the scale with which he was dealing, he was bound to make mistakes. If villages weren't bisected by the boundary, they were separated from the villagers' fields, railway stations from the towns they served, and communities from the resources on which they relied. Walter Reed, keeping the jewel in the crown, they had absolutely no conception. They asked me to come in and do this sticky job for them, and when I had done it, they hated it. But what could they expect in the circumstances? Surely, they must have realized what was coming to them. Sethi had decided on partition, but they had made absolute alino plans for coping with the situation. Radcliffe, quoted by Leonard Mosley, The Last Days of the British Raj. Challenges before the newborn nation, 633 Division of Civil, resolved the division of civil government amicably. A partition council, presided over by the Governor-General and consisting of 2 representatives each of India and Pakistan, was set up. The council was helped by a steering committee, consisting of H.M. Patel and Mohammed Ali, at operational level. All civil servants were offered to give their option about the dominion they wanted to serve. Around 160,000 employees opted for transfer from India to Pakistan or from Pakistan to India. For the personnel of the Indian civil services, a distinction was made between the Europeans and the Indians. The Indian members were to continue in service in their country of choice, India or Pakistan, on the existing scale-off service. The European officers could continue in service in their existing pay, leave, pension rights, etc. But if they wished to retire, they were entitled to special compensation and early retirement. Division of finances. The division of cash balances, as well as allocation of public debt, created tensions between the 2 countries. Pakistan wanted a 1/4 share of the total cash balances, but India had to point out that only a small portion of the cash balances represented the real cash needs of the undivided India, and the rest was maintained only as an anti-inflationary mechanism. Ramachandra Guha writes in his India after Gandhi that the Indian government had withheld Pakistan's share of the sterling balance, which the British owed jointly to the 2 dominions, a debt incurred on account of Indian contributions to the Second World War. The amount was some Rs 550 million. The Indian government was not keen to release the money due to Pakistan, as it was angry with Pakistan for having attempted to seize Kashmir by force. Gandhi saw theses being unnecessarily spiteful. He went on a fast, and made the ending of the fast conditional on the transfer of the money owed to Pakistan. He succeeded in pressurizing the Congress leadership to decide to give more cash resource to Pakistan. According to some scholars, this became one of the reasons for the assassination of Gandhi by a Hindu fanatic. 634. A Brief History of Modern India. Division of Defense Personnel and Equipment. For a smooth division of the armed forces and their plants, machinery, equipment, and stores, a joint defense council, headed by Auchinleck as its supreme commander, was set up. The council decided that Muslim-majority units should be transferred to Pakistan and non-Muslim units to India, but due to serious differences between the 2 parties, the post of supreme commander was abolished. Amid serious, the British troops started to leave India from August 17, 1947, and the process was completed by February 1948. Assassination of Gandhi on the evening of January 30, 1948, as he carried on his usual prayer meeting at Birla Mansion, New Delhi. Mahatma Gandhi was shot dead by Nathuram Godse. The event sent shock waves through the nation in making. Communalism and misinterpretation of nationalism were two fundamental factors under whose influence Godse killed Gandhi. In an address to the nation on the All India radio, Nehru summed up the mood and spirit of the time. "The light has gone out of our lives, and there is darkness everywhere. The best prayer we can offer him and his memory is to dedicate ourselves to truth and to the cause for which the great countryman of ours lived and for which he died." Sardar Patel appealed to the people not to seek revenge but to follow Gandhi's message of love and nonviolence. He said, "It is a shame for us that the greatest man of the world has had to pay with his life for the sins which we have committed. We did not follow him when he was alive. Let us at least follow his steps now he is dead." Godse was tried and sentenced to death. At his trial, he declared that he had acted as he had because of Gandhi's consistent pandering to the Muslims, culminating in his last pro-Muslim fast, which at last goaded me to the conclusion that the existence of Gandhi should be brought to an end immediately. On February 4, 1948, the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, RSS, was banned by the government. It was felt by the challenges before the newborn nation, 635 government, that the right-wing extremism, which the RSS was seen to represent, would be very harmful for the unity of the nation. Though not directly involved in the assassination of Gandhi, the organization was seen to have a hand in the Punjab violence. It also attracted the support of many of their refugees. It was also rumored that the members of the RSS had celebrated the death of Gandhi. Nehru considered that groups, such as the RSS, had the blood of Mahatma Gandhi in their hands, even though they dissociated themselves from his killing. The ban was lifted in July 1949, when the RSS accepted the conditions laid down by the government. The second conditions were that the Sangh would restrict itself to cultural activities and not meddle with politics, renounce its agenda of violence and secrecy, profess publicly loyalty to the Indian Constitution and flag tricolor, and organize itself on democratic principles. Rehabilitation and resettlement of refugees. The people displaced by partition were refugees, in the sense that they had not left their homes voluntarily. The two new governments did not organize an orderly exchange of population. Refugee resettlement became the immediate challenge for both governments, India and Pakistan. The Indian government established an emergency committee of the cabinet to deal with the crisis in Delhi, and a ministry of relief and rehabilitation to look after the refugees. In view of large-scale influx of displaced people, the notion of evacuee property, to be protected by government, for any future return of those who had left for Pakistan, became an empty rhetoric because it was almost impossible to force the refugees who settled in the empty houses of Muslims. This, at a later time, made the return of the refugees impossible. East Punjab. Some refugees were accommodated temporarily in refugee camps, which were run till 1949. For urban refugees, the government started industrial and vocational training schemes. 636. A brief history of modern India, and even grants were given to start small businesses or industries. The rural refugees were given land, agricultural loans, and housing subsidies. Although the state government and the central government mobilized massive resources, it was still not adequate, and a general trend of differentiate entitlements to such benefits was observed. For example, refugees with social and cultural capital, class and caste status and political connections often got the better deal, while the depressed classes were given little or no consideration. Bengal. The problem was much more prolonged and complicated in Bengal. By 1948, only a small group of high caste, landed or middle-class Hindus migrated to West Bengal by arranging exchange of property or jobs on individual levels. But during December 1949 and January 1950, due to a fresh outbreak of violence in Khulna, a large number of peasants started to leave East Pakistan. In revenge, anti-Muslim riots started in February 1950 and forced about 1 million Muslims to leave West Bengal. This further aggravated anti-Hindu violence in East Pakistan, and by 1951, about 15 lakh Hindu refugees arrived in West Bengal. But the Indian government did not recognize these migrants as refugees, and Nehru tried to send them back. Delhi Pact on minorities to resolve the problems of refugees and restore communal peace in the two countries, especially in Bengal, East Pakistan as well as West Bengal. The Indian Prime Minister, Jawaharlal Nehru, and the Pakistani Prime Minister, Liaquat Ali Khan, signed an agreement on April 8, 1950. The agreement, known as the Delhi Pact on Minorities or Nehru-Liaquat Pact, envisaged the appointment of ministers from minority communities in both Pakistan and India at both central and provincial levels. Under the pact, minority commissions were to be set up, together with a commissions of inquiry to look into the probable causes behind the communal riots on both sides of border, in Bengal, and Turkmen steps to prevent recurrence of such incidents. Under the pact, India and Pakistan also agreed to include challenges before the newborn nation, 637 representatives of the minority community in the cabinets of East Pakistan and West Bengal, and decided to depute two central ministers, one from each government, to remain in the affected regions for such period as might be necessary. The pact provided for the creation of an agency entrusted with the task of recovering and rehabilitating abducted women. The idea was criticized by many scholars. The idea to encourage refugees to return to their original homes failed because the two governments failed to restore confidence among the refugees. Further, the properties of the refugees were declared as enemy property. India brought amendments in the Enemy Property Act, 1968, in 2016 also. The provisions of the Narrow Liaquat Pact were severely criticized by Hindu nationalists like Syama Prasad Mukherjee, also spelt Shyama Prasad Mukherjee, and K.C. Neogi. Mukherjee resigned from the Nehru cabinet in protest. Ash believed that the refugee problem could only be solved through a transfer of population and acquisition of certain territories from Pakistan to rehabilitate the people who came to India. Centers of refugee settlements in India and Delhi, Lajpat Nagar, Rajendra Nagar, Punjabi Bagh, Nizamuddin East, and Kingsway Camp were some areas developed into housing complexes to settle the refugees permanently. People who came from West Pakistan settled in states like Punjab, which at the time included the present-day Haryana and Himachal Pradesh. The Sindhi Hindu settled in Gujarat, Maharashtra, Rajasthan, and Madhya Pradesh. Ulhasnagar, City of Joy in Maharashtra, was especially developed to settle refugees from Sindh areas. West Bengal, Assam, Tripura, and other northeastern states accommodated the refugees from East Pakistan, present Bangladesh. The government settled some refugees in the Andaman Islands too. At present, Bengalis form the largest linguistic group in some parts of Andaman Islands. Communists and independents on September 1948, on the pretext of maintaining law and order situation in South India, the Indian Army intervened and 638, a brief history of modern India took control of Hyderabad without much resistance from the Nizam. But the internal politics of Hyderabad became complicated due to the Telangana movement led by the communists. The alliance between the Congress and the communists had broken before the accession of Hyderabad into India. In December 1947, the Communist Party of India, CPI, had denounced the Indian independence as fake, with the slogan, Ye Azadi Judi Hai, and termed the Congress government led by Nehru as the stooges of Anglo-American imperialism and the feudal forces within the country. In February, March 1948, in its second Congress in Calcutta, the CPI adopted its political thesis, which formally declared that the national government established on August 15, 1947, was indeed the major enemy of the Indian people and hence required to be changed through general revolution. To achieve this goal, the communist leaders decided to follow what popularly came to be known as the BT Ranadev line, after the name of CPI's then General Secretary. They declared, the present state will be replaced by a People's Democratic Republic, a republic of workers, peasants, and oppressed middle classes. The communist insurgency spread to other parts of India, especially in West Bengal, which saw the revival of the Tebhaga movement and an urban insurgency in Calcutta. Why communists were skeptical about independence 1. They believed that a policy of class struggle and armed insurgency against the state run by the Congress alleged as collaborationist bourgeoisie was necessary to shift the attention of the masses from the politics of communal hatred that shrouded the country after partition 2. The late 1940s and the early 1950s witnessed communist successes in Asian countries like China, Malaya, Indonesia, the Philippines, and Burma, Myanmar. In September 1947, Russia announced its Ajdanov, the CISAs, in answer to the Marshall Plan, encouraging more activism on the part of the international communist parties. The Indian communists thus geared up for an armed insurgency. Challenges before the newborn nation, 6393. According to Ramachandra Guha, the CPI leadership, encouraged by the initial successes of the Telangana movement, misconceived the scattered disillusionment with Congress as revolutionary potential, and thought this is beginning of Red India. Shift from antagonistic strategy to constitutional democracy. The communist movement remained localized in Hyderabad and West Bengal. The mass support was sporadic and conditional, as people were not ready to reject the Congress so soon after independence. The government also decided to take stern action. While in the Hyderabad region, the Indian Armed Forces continued its police action. In West Bengal, the CPI was banned in March 1948, and in January, a Security Act was passed to imprison the communist leaders without trial. Within the communist leadership, there were divisions in the Chinese line and the Russian line, which became wider after the failure of a proposed railway strike on May 9, 1949. In September 1950, the prominent communist leaders like Ajay Ghosh, S.A. Dange, and S.V. Gate criticized the organization for its faulty strategies and its failure to take notice of the true picture of independent India. Consequently, in October 1951, at the Third Party Congress of the CPI, held in Calcutta, a significant shift in its policy was endorsed. It decided to withdraw the Telangana movement and forge an inclusive front of the peasants, workers, and middle classes. Consequently, the ban was lifted by the government. and the Indian communists participated in the general election of 1951-52, thus moving from an insurrectionist path to the path of constitutional democracy. 640. A Brief History of Modern India 640 Chapter 30, for the Indian states, the princely states, also called the Indian states, which covered a total area of 712,508 square miles, and numbered no fewer than 562, included tiny states such as Bilbari with a population of 27 persons only, and some big ones like Hyderabad, as large as Italy, with a population of 14 million. The East India Company acquired, in the process of conquest, important coastal tracts, the valleys of the great navigable rivers and such tracts which were rich in agricultural products and densely populated by prosperous people, while generally, the Indian states were the inaccessible and less fertile tracts off the Indian peninsula. The making of Indian states was largely governed by the same circumstances which led to the growth of East India Company's power in India. The evolution of relations between British authority and states can be traced under the following broad stages. The company's struggle for equality from a position of subordination, 1740-1765. Starting with Anglo-French rivalry with the coming of Dupleix in 1751, the East India Company asserted political identity with the capture of Arcot, 1751. With the Battle off Plassey in 1757, the East India Company acquired the Indian states' 641 power next only to the Bengal Nawabs. In 1765, with the acquisition of the Diwani of Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa, the East India Company became a significant political power. Policy of ring fence, 1765-1813. This policy was reflected in Warren Hastings, wars against the Marathas and Mysore, and aimed at creating buffer zones to defend the company's frontiers. The main threat was from the Marathas and Afghan invaders. The company undertook to organize Awadh's defense to safeguard Bengal's security. Wellesley's policy of subsidiary alliance was an extension off ring fence, which sought to reduce states to a position of dependence on British government in India. Major powers such as Hyderabad, Awadh, and the Marathas accepted subsidiary alliance. Thus, British supremacy was established. Policy of subordinate isolation, 1813-1857. Now, the imperial idea grew, and the theory of paramountcy began to develop. Indian states were supposed to act in subordinate cooperation with the British government and acknowledge its supremacy. The states surrendered all forms of external sovereignty, but retained sovereignty in internal administration. British residents were transformed from diplomatic agents of a foreign power to executive and controlling officers of a superior government. In 1833, the Charter Act ended the company's commercial functions, even as it retained political functions. It adopted the practice of insisting on prior approval/sanction for all matters of succession. In 1834, the Board of Directors issued guidelines to annex states wherever and whenever possible. This policy of annexation culminated in usurpation of 8 states by Dalhousie, including some big states such as Satara and Nagpur. 642. A Brief History of Modern Policy of Subordinate Union, 1857-1935. The year 1858 saw the assumption of direct responsibility by the Crown. Because of the states' loyalty during the 1857 revolt and their potential use as breakwaters in political storms of the future, the policy of annexation was abandoned. The new policy was to punish or depose but not to annex. After 1858, the fiction of authority of the Mughal emperor ended. Sanction for all matters of succession was required from the Crown, since the Crown stood forth as the unquestioned ruler and the paramount power. Now the rule inherited the Gadi, not as a matter of right, but as a gift from the paramount power, because the fiction of Indian status standing in a status of equality with the Crown as independent, sovereign states ended with the Queen adopting the title of Kaiser-i-Hind, Queen Empress of India. The paramount supremacy of the Crown presupposed and implied the subordination of states. The British government exercised the right to interfere in the internal spheres of states, partly in the interest of the princes, partly in the interest of people's welfare, partly to secure proper conditions for British subjects and foreigners, and partly in the interest of the whole of India. The British government was further helped in this encroachment by modern developments in communication: railways, roads, telegraph, canals, post offices, press, and public opinion. The government of India exercised complete and undisputed control in international affairs. It could declare war, peace, or neutrality for states. According to the Butler Commission in 1927, for the purpose of international relations, state territory is in the same position as British territory and state subjects in the same position as British subjects. Curzon's approach stretched the interpretation of old treaties to mean that the princes, in their capacity as servants of people, were supposed to work side by side with the Governor-General in the Indian States. 643. The scheme of Indian government. He adopted a policy of patronage and intrusive surveillance. He thought the relations between the states and government were neither feudal nor federal, but a type not based on a treaty, but consisting of a series of relationships having grown under different historical conditions that, in the course of time, gradually conformed to a single line. The new trend seemed to reduce all states to a single type, uniformly dependent on the British government and considered as an integral part of the Indian political system. Post-1905, a policy of cordial cooperation began to counter progressive and revolutionary developments in the face of large-scale political unrests. According to the recommendations of the Montfort Reforms, 1921, a Chamber of Princes Narendra Mandal was set up as a consultative and advisory body having no say in the internal affairs of individual states and having no powers to discuss matters concerning existing rights and freedoms. For the purpose of the chamber, the Indian states were divided into three categories. 1. Directly represented, 1092. Represented through representatives, 1273. Recognized as feudal holdings or Jaggers-Butler Committee. The question of extent of sovereignty and paramountcy was still undefined. The Butler Committee, 1927, was set up to examine the nature of relationship between the princely states and the government. It gave the following recommendations. 1. Paramountcy must remain supreme and must fulfill its obligations, adopting and defining itself according to the shifting necessities of time and progressive development of states. 2. States should not be handed over to an Indian government in British India, responsible to an Indian legislature, without the consent of states. Thus, paramountcy was left undefined, and this hydra-headed creature was left to feed on usage. Crown's prerogativing the princes implied consent. 644. A Brief History of Modern India v. Policy of Equal Federation, 1930-1947. A non-starter. The Government of India Act, 1935, proposed a federal assembly with 125 out of 375 seats for the princes and the Council of States, with 104 out of 160 seats for the princes, under its scheme of an all-India federation, which was subject to ratification by states representing more than half of the population and entitled to more than half of the seats in the Council of States. This scheme never came into existence, and after the outbreak of World War II, September 1939, it was dropped altogether, VI. Integration and merger. After World War II began, and a position of non-cooperation was adopted by the Congress, the British government tried to break the deadlock through the Cripps Mission, 1942, Wavell Plan, 1945, Cabinet Mission, 1946, and Attlee's Statement, February 1947. Cripps held that the British government did not contemplate transferring paramountcy of Crown to any other party in India. The states tried various schemes to forge onion of their own, envisaging themselves as sovereign in status or as a third force in the Indian political scene. The June 3 Plan and Attlee's Statement made it clear that the states were free to join either of the two dominions. And Mountbatten refused to give a sovereign status to the states. Sardar Patel, who was in charge of the states, ministry and the interim cabinet, helped by VP Menon, the secretary in the ministry, appealed to the patriotic feeling of rulers to join the Indian Dominion in matters of defense, communication, and external affairs, the three areas which had been part of the paramountcy of the Crown, and over which the states had anyway no control. By August 15, 1,947,136 states had joined the Indian Union, but others remained precariously outside. The Indian states 645 plebiscite and army action 1. Junagar, the Muslim Nawab, wanted to join Pakistan, but a Hindu majority population wanted to join the Indian Union. In the face of the repressive attitude of the Nawab, there was a plebiscite which decided in favor of India too. Hyderabad wanted a sovereign status. It signed a standstill agreement with India in November 1940. 7 Indian troops withdrew, and the Nizam's police and stormtroopers, Razakars, took over. The Nizam wanted an outlet to the sea Goa. The violence and supply of foreign arms prompted Indian troops to move in again in 1948, described as a police action to restore law and order. Hyderabad acceded in November 1949.3. Kashmir. The state of Jammu and Kashmir had a Hindu prince and a Muslim majority population. The prince envisaged a sovereign status for the state and was reluctant to accede to either of the dominions. As he procrastinated, the newly established state of Pakistan sent its forces behind a front of tribal militia and moved menacingly toward Srinagar. It was now that the prince was forced to sign an instrument of accession, October 1947, with the Indian Union, endorsed by the popular leader Sheikh Abdullah. Indian troops were dispatched to defend the state against the raiders from Pakistan. India's complaints to the UN Security Council regarding raids from Pakistan and the Indian offer to settle the status of the state through a plebiscite led to a ceasefire, but left 84,000 square km of area under Pakistani occupation. The special status of Jammu and Kashmir was recognized under Article 370 of the Indian Constitution, which implied a limited jurisdiction of the Indian Union over the state as compared to other states. Gradual integration. The problem now was twofold. I of transforming the states into viable administrative units, and Roman II of absorbing them into the constitutional units. This was sought to be solved by 1. Incorporating smaller states, 216 such states, into contiguous provinces and listed in Part A, 4. 646. A brief history of modern India. Instance. 39 states of Orissa and Chhattisgarh were incorporated into central provinces, Orissa. Gujarat states were incorporated into Bombay, too, making some states as centrally administered for strategic or special reasons, listed in Part C, 61 states. Himachal Pradesh, Vindhya Pradesh, Manipur, Tripura, Bhopal, etc. And 3. Creating 5 unions: United States of Kathiawar, United States of Matsya, Patiala and East Punjab States Union, Rajasthan, and United States of Travancore Cochin, later Kerala. Initially, these states acceded with respect to defense, communication, external affairs. Later, they felt that a closer association was necessary. The 5 unions and Mysore accepted Indian jurisdiction in union, concurrent subjects except taxation and subject to differences, as under Article 238, and the supervisory power of union for 10 years. The 7th Amendment, 1956, abolished Part B states as a class and formed one class out of Parts A and B. Thus, special provisions relating to Part B states were deleted. The Indian states thus became part of one uniform political setup.